Hello everyone, you're listening to The Progressive American. I'm your host, Connor Kelly. It is December 31st, 2021, and we have a lot to cover. Today we are covering Chris Wallace's departure from Fox, Mark Meadows being held in contempt, Dr. Oz's bid for a Senate seat, the January 6th Commission investigating Jim Jordan, and Ghislaine Maxwell being found guilty. With that out of the way, let's get into the news. After years of working at the network, Chris Wallace is officially leaving Fox News. The announcement came on Sunday the 12th and was announced by Wallace himself, who said, quote, 18 years ago, the bosses here at Fox News promised me they would never interfere with the guests I booked or a question I asked, and they kept that promise. I have been free to report to the best of my ability to cover the stories I think are important, to hold our country's leaders to account, unquote. Wallace was one of the handful of rebellious commentators at Fox who actually critiqued GOP members and Trump allies. To some, he was one of the only real journalists at Fox News. After his announcement, Chris Wallace officially joined CNN on its streaming platform. In a statement, Fox said, "We are extremely proud of our journalism and the stellar team that Chris Wallace was a part of for 18 years. The legacy of Fox News Sunday will continue with our star journalists, many of whom will rotate in the position until a permanent host is named," unquote. With Wallace gone, Fox loses yet another person who would not parrot the right's talking points. Others, like Shepard Smith, were also known for that brand of journalism, but he left the station as well. This in turn leaves Fox with an increasingly agitated and opinion-based team. Instead of a news organization balanced with some opinion, Fox is becoming increasingly extreme, not that it wasn't already. With these people gone, one can only imagine what Fox will become. And that is how this story is usually told from many media outlets. Many of them will argue that Wallace served as a counter to the extremism on Fox, and that by removing these figures, Fox will become an even more extreme institution. And there is some truth to that. But when it comes to how far Fox viewers would go, it is worth noting that Fox was always designed to act this way. More than that, however, Fox viewers were already rejecting this kind of check on their ideological narrative. When Shepard Smith attempted to counter the narrative that Hillary Clinton sold 20% of America's uranium to Russia, Fox viewers called for him to be fired. And why wouldn't they? From the very beginning, the people who created Fox News, mainly Roger Ailes, sought to create a news station that could parrot pro-Republican talking points that favored Republican administrations. In a document recovered from the Nixon Library, former Gawker reporter John Cook found that Roger Ailes proposed a pro-Nixon channel to keep Republicans in power safe. In that document, Ailes explains his thinking, saying, "Today, television news is watched more often than people read newspapers, than people listen to the radio, than people read or gather any form of communication. The reason? People are lazy. With television, you just sit, watch, listen. The thinking is done for you," unquote. And this is why I have such a massive problem with Fox News and those associated with it. Fox News was created by Republican operatives for Republican operatives. There was never any intention of providing fair and balanced coverage. It was created as an extension of the Republican Party to defend Republican politicians, and that is who they were working for. As much as we like to believe that people like Shepard Smith and Chris Wallace were a check, they weren't an effective one. They were nothing more than an extension of Fox News' branding. If you've got a bunch of opinion-based journalists who say whatever they want on the air, the most radical, crazed thing that you can find, you need somebody to balance that out. You need to have somebody that looks professional, presents themselves as newsworthy, as the ethical, responsible, stoic figure in media. Because otherwise, nobody is going to take you seriously. And that's the role Shepard Smith and Chris Wallace played. They can say that this is their redemption arc or whatever, but the fact of the matter is, they're part of the reason that Fox News was able to brand itself the way it has. Fox News might not have its slogan, fair and balanced anymore, but that's because they no longer need it. They no longer need people like Chris Wallace and Shepard Smith because they've exhausted their usefulness. And as much as I'd like to believe that these guys would have somehow managed to create some sort of a pushback within the network, I highly doubt that would happen. The truth is that Fox was building itself up from the very beginning to be a reactionary conservative force that could serve the Republican Party. And you don't react with an uprising and expect it to succeed within an institution like that, especially when that institution incentivizes the worst behavior possible in politics. That's why you've got Tucker Carlson, that's why you got Laura Ingraham, and that's why you got all these hacks on Fox News. If Shepard Smith and Chris Wallace expected Fox to change its tune, then they were naive, and we should not forget that they helped legitimize it by their presence instead of walking out years ago. Now, I'm not saying that these two aren't incapable of redemption or aren't legitimate in their desire to move on with their lives. I'm sure they don't want to be associated with Fox throughout much of its history. But that does not change that they contributed to Fox's current state. Had they protested earlier when Fox still depended upon them, when Fox was still trying to create this illusion of balance and control, then maybe it would make more sense to say these guys are the real journalists. But it's going to take a lot to actually make me think that these people, and really others like them, are serious about undoing the damage that Fox News did and what they did. So, as much as I'm happy for these two, as much as I'm happy for Chris Wallace that he's moving on with his career, I hope he actually addresses his career at Fox News, because until he does, I'm going to hold off and say that he is just as guilty as everybody else at Fox News for our current state of politics. The House has once again elected to hold another Trump ally in contempt for their refusal to comply with lawful subpoenas. This time, it is former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. After months of cooperation, Meadows stopped complying with the committee on December 7th, with lawyers for Meadows writing to them saying, "We agreed to provide thousands of pages of responsive documents, and Mr. Meadows was willing to appear voluntarily, not under compulsion of the Select Committee subpoena to him for a deposition to answer questions about non-privileged matters. Now actions by the Select Committee have made such an appearance untenable," unquote. In response to the letter, Representatives Thompson and Cheney wrote back, warning Meadows and his lawyers about the cost of their actions. Tomorrow's deposition, which was scheduled at Mr. Meadows' request, will go forward as planned, the statement said. If indeed Mr. Meadows refuses to appear, the Select Committee will be left no choice but to advance contempt proceedings and recommend that the body in which Mr. Meadows once served refer him for criminal prosecution, end quote. After Meadows refused to show, the committee voted to recommend him for contempt charges, putting the issue before the Department of Justice. The last time that a Trump ally refused to comply with the subpoena, they were indicted. Indeed, Steve Bannon is currently facing criminal charges for his failure to comply with the commission's demands, and is likely to face some time if found guilty. And if the DOJ is serious about enforcing the law, then they should absolutely indict Meadows as well. Meadows is of particular importance because he could have had an active role in inflaming the tensions of January 6th. Not only was he a member of the White House under Trump, but he also showed communications with others suggesting that he was more involved than he cared to admit. In an email he sent to Trump allies, Meadows reportedly told an unnamed individual that the National Guard would, quote, protect pro-Trump allies. Meadows has also previously handed over 9,000 documents and personal records of himself and the president's family, or at least the former president. Now, however, the committee wants to ask him questions about said information under oath, and that is when he's suddenly deciding to defer to Trump's ridiculous claims of executive privilege, despite Trump not being the president anymore. With the midterms coming up, it is more important than ever for Democrats to exercise their power to investigate and compel testimony to know just how extensive this attack really was on America's political power. If not to get information, then to remind people that Congress can and will force people to do the right thing when someone threatens our democracy. And make no mistake, Mark Meadows is key to that endeavor. This was the White House Chief of Staff under Donald Trump. He absolutely would have been aware of the proceedings of Donald Trump's actions if he was involved in any sort of unacceptable behavior that might merit a criminal indictment. So if there's to be an investigation to determine how bad January 6th really was, or at the very least to figure out if it was pre-planned, Mark Meadows would be the person to question under oath. Not just to demand documents from, not just to get him to hand over his phone records, to actually get him to explain what those materials mean and what were his intentions along with other Trump allies. And that's key here. There are plenty of other figures who absolutely should have been forced to testify who haven't yet. But Meadows, being the former chief of staff, is of critical importance to this investigation. And I hope that the DOJ will realize what the committee is trying to do and defer to their judgment and indict Meadows for his refusal to comply. In more police-related news, former police officer and convicted murderer Derek Chauvin has pled guilty to charges that he violated George Floyd's rights. The Chicago Sun-Times reported that he, quote, admitted he willfully deprived Floyd of his right to be free from unreasonable seizure, including unreasonable force by a police officer, unquote. Chauvin was previously convicted for the murder of George Floyd and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Chauvin's decision came as a plea agreement for his additional charges and comes before 3 of the other officers involved in the Floyd case are about to be tried. And this is not the first time that Chauvin has been caught using excessive force against black people. In 2017, he infamously hit a 14-year-old boy with his flashlight and held him by his throat, claiming he wasn't complying. The boy was not resisting, and Chauvin has also pled guilty to violating that young boy's rights. The new report shows that not only is there no room to defend Chauvin anymore, but that Chauvin himself has stopped defending his position. But more than that, we now have an admission by Chauvin that he had a history of violence against not 1, but 2 black Americans and violated their rights consistently, with one of them dying as a result. And that matters because there were some on the right who made the argument that this was not racialized or that Chauvin had no racial motive behind his brutality. And part of the good news is that Chauvin is a strong example of a system becoming more willing to prosecute cops, but not enough. Chauvin's guilty plea should serve 2 points. Firstly, we have a system that, with pressure, will hold officers to account, though nowhere near what we should expect in terms of amount. Secondly, the racialized element remains just as strong as it did before. It will take more than Chauvin paying the price for his actions until this abuse of black Americans comes to an end. It requires consistent and unmitigated justice against all officers who follow this path. And that's going to come with long-term investment in political movements, not just within political parties, but in long-term opposition to police hiding themselves from the public and from any sort of transparency. And that means people need to be always ready to be out in the streets, to protest, to do whatever it takes to get this kind of thing to end once and for all. Because otherwise, we're just going to keep saying people's names. More and more people are going to lose their friends, their family members, and more people are just going to suffer and die as a result of this kind of abuse. And until we hold the police accountable, and until we hold our leadership accountable, nothing will change. In yet another example of celebrities taking part in politics where they shouldn't, Dr. Oz is running for the United States Senate. In a statement released by Oz, the television personality wrote, quote, "During the pandemic, I learned that when you mix politics and medicine, you get politics instead of solutions. That's why I'm running for the United States Senate, to help fix the problems and to help us heal," end quote. There is no guarantee he will win, as he is faced with challenges in the Republican primary for retiring Senator Pat Toomey's seat. He faces Jeff Bartos, a Philadelphia businessman, and Carla Sands, who served as U.S. ambassador to Denmark under the Trump administration. Oz has also condemned the approach to COVID-19, particularly on restrictions, saying, "They took away our freedom without making us safer." Now, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that I'm kind of tired of celebrities who really have no principles running for office, especially people like Oz, who has spent most of his career spreading treatments and making medical claims that are not backed up by any evidence. In fact, he had to testify and admit that before the United States Senate. It should not surprise anyone that our politics has gotten progressively more convoluted and frankly stupid when people like Mehmet Oz are seen as valuable contributors to the body politic. People who are more about aesthetics than actual substance are the centerpiece of today's politics, and it is partially because of this name recognition nonsense. What about Mehmet Oz makes a good public administrator? Nothing. He's never ran for office before, much less held one. So long as Americans keep looking for savior-like figures and simple narratives, we will continue to suffer this dumbed-down reactionary political world. But if he's serious about this and he does win the primary, Democrats might be in a better position to take the seat. Republicans only managed to hold on to Toomey's seat by 1% of the vote in the last election, and Biden won Pennsylvania by 2 points, making this seat a contested spot. Without an incumbent, the Democrats could take a shot at Republicans' brand, and with luck, control over the seat could fall into their hands. And considering Dr. Oz's less than reputable past, it would be an easy target. So as much as I am annoyed with this idea that celebrities like Dr. Oz are running and getting more involved in politics when common people are not, I also see this as an opportunity to make a point about these kinds of people, that they're not good political operators, and their past with being outlandish and crazed about what they say and what they claim could come back to bite them. So if I were a Democratic strategist, I would pay attention to this race and see if we could pick up another seat just by making sure that Dr. Oz's ridiculous name is associated with the Republican platform for years to come. But we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, we're going to take a real quick break. Stay with us, we have plenty of great stories for you. In more January 6th news, the commission is seeking to interview Ohio Representative Jim Jordan over conversations he had with the former President Donald Trump over the insurrection. In their letter to Jordan, the commission explained their request, writing, "We understand that you had at least one and possibly multiple communications with President Trump on January 6th. We would like to discuss each such communication with you in detail," unquote. The commission is also looking into communications that Jordan had with the Trump legal team, as well as how he contributed to the claims that the election was stolen via his contact with pro-Trump activists. The commission also notes in its letter that Jordan participated in meetings that were intended to overthrow the election, and thus make him a person of interest when it comes to their investigation and how they determine whether or not the attack was pre-planned. This is especially important when you consider that Jim Jordan was a close ally with another person that the commission is interested in, former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Now that the House is recommending charges against Mark Meadows, it'll be interesting to see how they handle this ally. If anything, we can expect to see Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows be two parts of the investigation's larger examination of White House communications and information regarding their involvement with other activists who were at the rally on January 6th. But so long as the commission is waiting on good faith from Republican leadership or members of Congress, the slower the process will be. And so the Republicans need to be told and reminded that they don't control the commission and that it is their rhetoric that started this entire thing. And instead of waiting for Jim Jordan and others to comply with their requests, I think the commission should just default on subpoenas. Because at this moment, we have seen agents of Trump again and again refuse to comply with requests. Not demands, requests. And I don't think Jim Jordan's going to be any different. So unless I'm proven wrong within a short amount of time, I hope that the commission will start to react and treat the situation with the gravity it deserves, and will not allow people like Jordan to slow their proceedings to the point of utter uselessness. Our country's democracy depends upon it. The people depend upon it. In some good news, the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond will be turned over to the city's Black History Museum. The decision was announced by Governor Ralph Northam this Thursday after much debate among local leaders. 8 other Confederate statues will also be moved to the museum, and their usage will be determined by the local community. In a statement to NPR, Northam explained, quote, "Symbols matter, and for too long, Virginia's most prominent symbols celebrated our country's tragic division and the side that fought to keep alive the institution of slavery by any means possible. Now it'll be up to our thoughtful museums, informed by the people of Virginia, to determine the future of these artifacts, including the base of the Lee Monument, which is taken on special significance as protest art." Unquote. This is especially important right now because not only is this happening in the former capital of the Confederacy, but it is also showing how we can react to these statues in a way that allows the public to still use them as tools to teach accurate history. Now, there are a lot of critics out there who don't want these statues removed because they operate under this notion that removing these statues is equivalent to erasing the history behind them. But the truth is that responses like what Northam has done, what the city of Virginia has done, proves that that is not the case. If anything, it shows that we can use these symbols that were created to perpetuate the lost cause myth and other white supremacist lies to undermine those very lies and propaganda. If anything, it's an attempt to create a more educated public that is aware of how symbols are used to influence them and to prevent those symbols from being used again to manipulate them. And to me, that seems like a very important endeavor, not just as a matter of history, but as a matter of having a healthy public in a democracy like the United States. Whenever we want to talk about how we as a country want the people to rule over the country, that the people hold the power, there is an underlying assumption that the people know what's best. And in order for that to hold true, we need to make sure the public is aware of previous mistakes and attempts at propaganda. Otherwise, we will be susceptible to that propaganda in the future. If not in this generation, then in the next. And the lost cause and these statues that come with it are a perfect example. So I look forward to seeing how these statues are handled, how the lessons are taught in the museums, and I look forward to seeing how others react to this, because this is a step in the right direction in my opinion. For our final story, we turn to Ghislaine Maxwell. Those of you who listened to my last podcast will know that Maxwell was being tried for her involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. She allegedly helped him traffic young girls and was abusing them herself. Now, however, we can safely remove the word allegedly from the equation, as Maxwell has been convicted on 5 charges, including trafficking of a minor. 4 women testified against Maxwell, showing that she enticed them into sexual acts with Epstein when they were children. Several of them were as old as 14. She faces 16 years in prison, practically a life sentence for the 60-year-old. While the sentencing hasn't begun, I really hope that we see her get the maximum possible sentence. This is a woman who not only helped traffic in minors, but was also actively abusing them herself. She knew multiple young children were being abused and didn't care. I mean, how sick and twisted do you have to be to abuse anyone for sex, much less children? The good news is that she will almost certainly never see the light again. But so long as there is an active attempt to avoid investigating the people who associated with Epstein, there will never be true justice for the victims. Epstein and Maxwell were not alone in their behavior. Alan Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, and now Donald Trump are known to have been on Epstein's plane, and every single one of them should be investigated for their involvement. Dershowitz and Prince Andrew are of particular importance because they have allegations against them for their involvement with Epstein directly. In the case of Prince Andrew, a woman by the name of Virginia Giuffre has alleged that she was trafficked through Epstein's trafficking ring and that she was forced to have sex with people, including the prince. In response, Andrew has argued that her civil case against him is baseless and that the court has no jurisdiction. Similarly, Dershowitz is accused by the same woman of rape, as well as another woman by the name of Sarah Ransom. He also wrote a piece in 1997 where he argued that the age of consent should be lowered to 15 years old. So make no mistake, these people are sick. And it isn't like they're the only ones. There's a similar pattern with Donald Trump, who has multiple allegations of sexual assault and sexual harassment over his career. All of this is to say that none of these people should get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to whether or not they should be investigated. They should. They have too many incidents of sexual misconduct to ignore, and anything less than a thorough investigation into them is a disservice of the entire justice system. Now, that doesn't mean that they're automatically guilty. Everyone has a right to be presumed innocent. Always, always, no matter what. But when it comes to how people have reacted to these people in power being associated with someone like Epstein and Maxwell, it seems to me that there is not enough pressure on leadership to actually push for an investigation. With Dershowitz and with Andrew, it's already being done by the women who were children at the time, who are victims themselves. But there's very little call for a thorough whole investigation from anyone outside of a handful of conspiracy theorists who have co-opted the entire thing. So to me, as a matter of making sure positions of power and people in power don't become corrupted by this kind of thing in the future, we need to actually come down hard on this. And that comes with investigations, depositions, and questioning from lawyers. If we want to actually deal with this serious scandal with the gravity it deserves, then there needs to be an element of transparency, an element of pulling back the curtains. And I'm sure that some of these people will probably be found innocent of any wrongdoing, and if that's the case, then so be it. But at the very least, if you're on the flight log as being involved with somebody who we know was a pedophile, who had associates who are now convicted for trafficking minors, you should get an investigation. You should be investigated. I think that's probable cause enough. We owe it to the victims and we owe it to ourselves to uncover what exactly happened here. Because so long as it's only Maxwell paying the price, then we haven't gone far enough. That's all for this episode. Thanks again for joining me. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it around on social media. If you want to see more content outside of the podcast, consider checking out the website. It is www.progressive-american.com. You get access to this podcast, my YouTube, and my newsletter. If you want to see all my content talk to me directly, you can also comment there. This will be my last podcast for the year, and it has been a wonderful time. I look forward to talking more about this kind of thing in January, and thanks again for everything you've done to support this show. I really appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and have a happy new year.